I'm going to record.
Woof. I will
By
continue.
continuing to be
I'm
in the meeting,
consenting.
you're consenting. Oh, nice. Okay, good. Good.
Wow, look at this. All right. Max, thank you.
All right,
Just
Hanson, I
saved
didn't say
this
that was
whole
okay.
thing.
No, my household is a Zoom household, but with like 7 and 9-year-olds who have meetings like this where like the other 7-year-olds just learn how to change their backgrounds and like draw on the teacher's face. I think it's a
Ooh.
different experience than what this is about to be, I imagine.
Mhm.
I don't know if Adam's going to join, but why don't we get started? Because I think the important people are here. I don't need to say much, but I sent you guys a little bit of information on Nadia. You may have been able to click on some links. If you don't know who Nadia is, she's a badass. She's a friend. She's an awesome musician. She is a podcast host, as we can tell from her setup. It is so much better than ours. She has one that's happening right now during coronavirus called Living Music, and there's already been a few awesome episodes, and so is going to be on it. I believe Living Music is a live thing that happens when it's not a radio show. Is that true, Nadia?
So Living Music is going to be like a nicely produced podcast that takes as its source material live events. So it's like a big concert that happens that we record and then sort of package into a slightly more highly produced podcast format. But we were supposed to launch that in the fall, and given that everyone's stuck at home with not a lot to do right now, we decided to kind of anticipate that fall launch and do sort of a pirate radio, like Wayne's World basement edition of Living Music, which is what I've been hosting for the past couple weeks. There's an episode that airs tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live. If you guys care to tune in, that'll be with composer Nico Muley and Richard Reed Perry from Arcade Fire and the flute player Alex Sopp. And that'll be really fun. So,
yay. I just saw Alex post about that. We should all check that out. You said 9 o'clock?
Yeah. 9 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah. But Nadia's also a violist. She's an awesome performer, plays in a lot of really great ensembles. Y Music being one of them. There's many others, and hosts. Nadia does everything. Actually, last time we saw you, Nadia, I think you were interviewing us before our show in New York, and you left our show to go to another show. You were like a double booked kind of person. You had a New York Phil thing happening right after a Carnegie Hall thing. So it was very, very cool
But
things that Nadia's
not
up to.
anymore.
No, those things
up
are
to
not
anything
happening
anymore.
right
Yeah.
now. Now she's very sought after on Zoom as a Zoom meeting host. But the reason why we asked Nadia to talk here is because she is somebody that knows more about Icelandic music than either me or Eric. She's a part of a collective / label called Bedroom Community that has some roots in Iceland and has played a bunch of music by different awesome contemporary composers. And I'm not sure that you all would know just kind of how vibrant the scene is right now in Iceland and how many awesome contemporary composers are writing. So we thought for the rest of the semester, one idea would be to look at some of that kind of hotbed of interesting Icelandic composers and kind of use that as a jumping off point to compare that to the music that you guys have been jumping into already, since the songs that you guys have been working on, there's not a ton of, there's not comparative recordings to deal with or that kind of thing, as we found out as we jumped into these songs. So that's going to be the kind of preface for today. I'm going to try to be a DJ of sorts. I have a Spotify playlist for you whenever Nadia needs me. But other than that, we're going to pass the Frisbee to Nadia and let her take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So, I mean, I think my goal for this hour together is to just kind of give you a little bit of a primer on sort of the evolution of music in Iceland and why I suspect it is the way that it is. And I'm going to cover 5 Icelandic composers. Since there are 5 of you, there are more than these 5 Icelandic composers out there, but these are the ones that I in many cases have worked with the most closely, and then in one case just seemed like the kind of grandfather of Icelandic music, so I figured it would be a good place to start with him. One of the things that is weird about Iceland, or interesting to think about Iceland, is that it's simultaneously kind of ancient and incredibly modern. It's funny right now because we're all quarantined, we're all doing social distancing, but we're so in touch with each other because of the internet, and because of the internet more than anything else. And it's kind of shocking to me how isolated Iceland was until incredibly recently. So it's, you know, it's an island in the middle of the Atlantic. It is sort of equidistant between North America and Europe. In fact, there's this really awesome place you can go in Iceland called Thingvellir National Park, or actually Thingvellir, if I'm going to pronounce it correctly, which I'm trying, but anyway. And that's the continental divide where the North American and the European plate hit, and they hit in this really cool way where you can really see like one entire continent rubbing up against another one. And the Vikings used to hold Congress in this particular place because it's kind of a natural amphitheater. But so Vikings settled it. It was completely unsettled prior to like the 9th century. They showed up in various ways, like when shipping got really good in the 800s, and like the Vikings who really settled it kind of showed up in the 900s. And again, please double check all my facts and figures because they're mostly emotional, but they're true-ish. They're all true-ish. You know, in the 900s, the Vikings, who are sort of the ancestors of all of the current Icelanders, showed up and started trying to like really make a go of it in Iceland. And basically, the crazy thing about that is, you know, they brought their old Icelandic is this sort of Germanic language, really Proto-Germanic language with a million different declensions and like 15 different cases, depending on if you're talking about like 1 egg or 2 eggs or 5 eggs or 7 or more eggs. Like, it's a really confusing thing. In fact, my friend Nico Muley, who's a composer who is the reason that I went to Iceland a lot of times, speaks Icelandic a bit well, but oftentimes he'll order food for us saying like, I will have a soup and she will have a soup, because saying that we want 2 soups is really complicated because it's this really sort of old, antiquated, messed up language. But as a result of the fact that like that language came there in the 10th century and has been relatively unchanged, they can read these sagas, these 10th century sagas that were written in like a runic form of Icelandic. Sorry, it wasn't runic. It's like in actual Germanic, you know, normal letters. They can read that the way that we read Shakespeare, which is to say, seems a little old-fashioned, but like they can totally get through it, a modern Icelandic speaking person. So that should show you to some extent how isolated they were, basically between the 9th century and the Second World War. During the Second World War, first the English and then the US ended up using them as a strategic air base, because you could sort of they needed to refuel at that point somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, and they could do so in Iceland. So I think that was around like 1940. Again, all of my facts and figures are kind of bullshit, but they're emotionally correct. All of a sudden there was sort of modern 20th century stuff happening in Iceland. But as a result of that time frame, Iceland never had the Industrial Revolution. So they never had this moment of like incredible factory buildup and like the rape and pillage of the the natural resources and all of that. It was like sort of this brilliant, perfect, pristine, untouched place where they were basically farming and raising some livestock. And then it all of a sudden became kind of a part of the modern era in the 1940s with really no transition in between those two things. The other thing to know about Iceland is that it was a Danish colony, Danish something. I'm trying to look this up. But anyway, it was occupied by Denmark. It was sort of owned by Denmark for a while, and then gained its independence not that long ago. So to the extent that it is kind of related to the rest of Europe, it's like a very Northern European sort of pseudo-Scandinavian kind of vibe. But then there's also this just weird Viking thing going on that is hard to put your finger on. And part of that is because the landscape of Iceland is so unbelievably crazy and rugged. It's the second newest landmass in the world. So the newest land on Earth is Hawaii, and the second newest land on Earth is Iceland. So if you can imagine sort of when the Earth was mostly volcanic and just cooling and sort of coming from its proto-Earth, whatever, Pangea state, like Iceland is still in that particular, it's still cooling down from all of that kind of crazy seismic activity and all that volcanic activity. So in Iceland, you have a bunch of glaciers, ton of ice, and a bunch of volcanoes. You do not have a lot of trees, and that's for two reasons. Number one, volcanoes kind of got rid of a lot of trees, and number two, 9th century, 10th century Vikings deforested most of it, trying to build boats and build houses. And just the land wasn't fertile enough to kind of build up all of that vegetation again. And even when you go there now, there's like really confusing things, like I don't know if you know the plant lupine. Like if you're in New England, sometimes you'll see this beautiful flower lupine, and it'll be like in a whole field of wildflowers. For some reason in Iceland, lupine is like the only flower that grows. So you'll just see just this one crop of this bright purple flower, and it's among like these lava fields with tons of moss. And then there's like a cone of a volcano, and then there's a glacier over there. And I bring this up in a conversation about music because Icelandic music is on some different kind of trip than the rest of European music. And the first composer I want to talk to you about is this guy called Jón Leifs. Most Icelandic people have patronymics, however you say that. It's like I would be Nadia, Robert's daughter, because my dad's name is Robert. The Icelandic phone book is arranged by first name because you can't really look people up by family name. So it's kind of a crazy thing, but it's really helpful when I'm like, oh, do you know Gabriel? He's Valgyr's son, and like his name is Gabriel Valgyr's son, so it sort of makes sense to that extent. And also there's actually it's really interesting. Most of the Icelandic people I know aren't married, but they have like 3 kids through whatever, because whoever they were dating when they were 22, they had a kid with, whoever they were dating when they were like 30, they had a kid with, and whoever they were dating when they were like 38, they had a kid with. And it's a result. It's really confusing. I mean, this is sort of a slightly, a bit of an aside, but because it's such a small genetic pool in Iceland, there's actually a website you can check to see what your relationship is with any other Icelandic person that you have met. And because all of the sort of generations get all mixed up because people have like half siblings of multiple ages and in various generations, and it's all confusing. That website gets its majority of its hits on Sunday morning, which is interesting. So you want to see if the person you met last night is somebody that you're actually related to. And this is not a joke. This is dead serious. Anyway, so Iceland has a sort of like bonobo-y character to it in terms of the way that people interact. And it's a really rugged and crazy landscape. So this guy, Jón Leifs, who was the first sort of well-known international composer from Iceland, does not have a patronymic. He's one of the very few Icelanders with a last name, with a family name, Leifs. And it probably came from Leif's son at some point, but his whole family and his whole line is just has that as an actual family last name. And he went to Germany. I went to Leipzig actually to study in the 1920s. And became sort of a famous conductor and a sort of relatively well-known Icelander about Europe. He married a Jewish woman, had a couple kids, and eventually had to flee Germany in the 1940s for obvious reasons. But weirdly, also, I think part of the reason his music didn't really survive is because Hitler liked it a lot. So it was a strange, very strange mixture of cultural situations where Hitler thought his stuff was great, even though he had a Jewish wife and Jewish kids. And basically he was kind of erased from the narrative for a while. I want to play you some of his music because even though, yes, you can hear examples of, I guess what I would consider to be sort of like late 19th century romantic tendencies in his stuff, it's also incredibly bizarre. And the very first time I heard his music, the very first time I went to Iceland, in fact, in 2006, it's this one of these overnight flights where you're flying from like 8 p.m. New York time, and you get there 5 hours later, and it's meant to be 7 a.m, and you're meant to have had like a full night's sleep, but you're kind of cracked out. And I went to a concert of Jón Leifs music that was a matinee the day that I landed, and it was using all of these. It was like some kind of oratorio inspired by ancient Viking texts that also used all these Viking instruments, including like a horn that looked like a rainfall shower head and all of this crazy stuff. So I was just like, where am I and what is this? And I want to play you a little bit of the kind of music and the kind of harmonies that he uses, which I think are a little bit out of this world. So the first piece we're going to listen to is called Spring Song. Opus 46. This is a piece he actually wrote I think it's also in the 50s. So this is a little bit of a later piece. And hopefully, Jason, you can figure out how to play a piece.
All right, I think I got this. This is the first time I'm doing the share thing, so send good vibes, but I think I got this.
Cool.
So if I go here, I'm gonna do this and this, and studio fade.
Yes. See, this is very professional.
Take my job seriously.
So there's something a little bit nuts about like it's just all parallel fifths, which is great and sounds a little bit like organum or a little bit like something crazy. Plus, it's got this kind of rhythmic element to it, but it's not really pulsy. It's sort of it's interesting music to me anyway. And I was sort of like, this has to be some weird kind of Viking-y vibe. I mean, I don't even really get it. And I want to play you another song of his, which I feel like feels to me more like an antecedent to a lot of the Icelandic music scene as I currently observe it. And let's listen to that a little bit, and then we can talk. So this should be Húreisting, which is consolation. Awesome. So I think we can hear again, there's this interesting, like, just jump from chord to chord. It's not counterpoint, right? It's almost like a block of chords and then a block of chords and then a block of chords. I found that really interesting. Also, it does feel like there's an incredible amount of emotion behind this music, and it's certainly related to romantic music, but to me, it has a different flavor to it. So Jon Leifs was sort of like the first famous Icelandic composer, and there are a whole bunch of people between him and the crop of composers I'm now about to talk about that you can look into, including people like Haukur Tómasson. There's Pauk something. But if you Google Icelandic composers, you'll see a whole bunch of people in their sort of like currently in their 60s, 70s that I feel like are really this bridge. Jon Leifs died in 1968. And then there is this incredible new crop. And I think, in the 1940s, Iceland all of a sudden went into kind of the modern era. And then in the 1950s and 60s with television, really soaked up a ton of pop culture. And now in this internet age, I feel like they're leading culture in a lot of ways. If you think about all of the bands and musicians that have come out of Iceland. Something that's really important not to forget is that it's still an incredibly tiny country. There are around 370,000 Icelanders total, top to tail. And they're growing, but that's so small. I mean, I don't know how many people live in Princeton, for example. But I feel like it might be like,
probably bigger than Princeton, but
yeah.
We're talking 2 Princetons is Iceland or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like it's like Park Slope or like one of like a more significant neighborhood of New York City when you're talking about 370,000 people. And it, as a result, given how sort of, it's a very artistic culture. And I think there's 2 theories that I have for that. Number one, their days and nights, their solar cycle, whatever it's actually supposed to be called, really varies from summer to winter. So because they're so far north, in the summer, they get a ton of daylight. I was in Reykjavik around the solstice this past summer, and it got dark, but mostly it got dark around like 1:30 in the morning, and then the sun came up around like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then for like the hours surrounding that actual dark time, there was just a sunset for a really long time. So those days are incredibly long, and in the winter the days are incredibly short. Obviously, if you go further north, these things are even more exaggerated, but the majority of people live in Reykjavik. And I think especially in winter, you have to have some kind of indoor hobby. In Icelandic, there's actually a different word for like hobby that is sort of sportsy and a hobby that is kind of crafty. And most people have both. So they'll be like, I like horseback riding and knitting. Those are my A kind of hobby and B kind of hobby. And it's sort of like a summer/winter hobby. They're also, it's a great socialist system with tons of wonderful teaching in the arts, et cetera. So there's a lot of great education. But I say this because, here oftentimes we'll have kids who go to conservatory and really focus on classical music. And, like me, for example, I'm a viola player. I really focus on classical music. And I kind of came to know stuff about contemporary non-classical music and pop music like as an adult, weirdly. Like that's very much my situation now. I play with bands and songwriters a lot, but I never really did that growing up. Or on the other side, we'll have people who play guitar, are songwriters that don't really engage with classical music that much. In Iceland, I have found that the vast majority of musicians do not care about what genre they are working in. So a lot of these artists that I'm going to show you, I'm going to kind of show you their more classical sphere thing, but they've also all worked with a ton of non-classical artists as well. So the first one I want to show you is probably the most famous Icelandic composer right now writing, who's a woman called Anna Thorvaldsdóttir. And I used to have a podcast called Meet the Composer. If you're interested in more Anna Thorvalds, I would absolutely recommend that you check out the podcast I did with her, because it's like we did a long and beautiful interview, and she talks about a lot of cool stuff. We don't really have time to get into a ton of it here. But one of the things she talks about is Iceland there's not very many tall buildings and there's not very many trees. There is a lot of wind. They're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, there's this incredible city called Vík, which is on the southern tip of Iceland, where if you go due south from Vík, the next time you hit land is Antarctica. It's just like straight shot all ocean. So you can imagine the wind in Iceland. it can get pretty real. And her sort of whole theory about why she wrote the music that she wrote was that she's trying to sort of vibe off of this kind of constant blow of wind, which is kind of a natural sound and backdrop to everyday life in Iceland. And it's her theory, at least that in her music, there's this kind of drone or ominous sound that kind of threads through everything. And I almost feel like I can hear that in like almost all Icelandic music. So let's listen to an example of Anna Thorvaldsdottir. This is a short movement from her piece In the Light of Air. This is the third movement called Existence. And this is also a really cool piece because the whole work has an accompanying scheme of incandescent light bulbs that go off in sort of different ways with this work, which you can check out online. And I highly recommend you do, but we can just listen to this movement for now. Yeah. So I feel like we're about to hear a lot of music that has this like bed of constant sound, which can feel ominous. It can totally feel ominous, but I think once you kind of get used to that being true, everything kind of takes on a different meaning. And I think there are certain places that are known for writing really rhythmic music or something like that. Iceland is not known for writing really rhythmic music, but it is known for writing music with really interesting, toothsome, fascinating timbres and textures. And I know this is not the best way to experience very detailed textures via, this particular Zoom call, but as you do some exploration on your own, I feel like that's something to really look out for, is how incredibly specific people will get about timbres and textures that I feel like a lot of other music doesn't contain. So that's Anna Thorvaldsdottir. She is, I don't know, I feel like she's in her 40s approximately, so she's on the youngish side and has an incredible amount of both sort of orchestral and chamber music to listen to. The next person I'd love to talk about is Valgir Sigurdsson. Valgir, if any of you know Björk, who's probably the most famous Icelandic musician. Valgir was her sort of engineer and producer for a whole bunch of her later albums. I think Medulla was the big one that he produced pretty extensively. And he's also a composer himself. And he is one of these people that, I first started working with him around 2006. And I had this like very antiquated notion that electronic music was sort of soulless MIDI sequences. That were kind of a bad imitation of acoustic instruments. That was just kind of the particular prejudice I was taking into electronic music when I was in college and beyond. And Valgir was the first person who was able to create electronic textures that really felt like they breathed to me. And he kind of really cracked my brain open in terms of what that stuff can sound like. So I want to play two examples of his work. One of them is, let's just play a piece of his from not so long ago. This is from No Night's Dark Enough, the first movement called Flow, and we'll just listen to a little bit of this.
And Nadia, when you can see the playlist, make sure, I think I found the second one that you're looking for, but make sure it's the right thing.
Sure, absolutely.
Take a look.
Yep.
See here.
Awesome. And Jason, maybe you can look for that other piece while I kind of sum up that. The artist might be Liam Byrne.
Yeah.
Yep. So what's interesting about that music, right, is like when you think about the Jon Leifs and how those chords work and how all of that kind of non-counterpoint, just like chord thing is happening, I actually feel that has a lot of resonance with Valgir and even with Anna. And then there's that same kind of like constant drone, wind on this crazy elevation thing happening as well, which I feel like to me feels really true to Iceland, plus all of this very spectacular timbre and color in the way that he writes. The next thing I want to play for you by Valgir, if we can find it, is a collaboration he did with Liam Byrne, who's a viola da gamba player, interpreting a very, very old piece of music that Liam sort of recorded on the gamba, but Valgir then produced in this sort of electronic and fantastical way. And this is the kind of work that I feel like so many Icelandic musicians are doing, which is they don't feel bound by like a particular genre or the fact that they're classical musicians or non-classical musicians. I feel like they take things with a massive, massive grain of salt, and I really love that. So here's that piece.
Let's see.
Yeah. All of this music is so great, and I encourage you to listen to it on your own time, just giving you like a taste for what is going on here. The next composer is really fun because she just won like every single award you can win this year. She won an Oscar for Best Original Score. She won an Emmy. I think she also won BAFTA and like whatever. She won all the awards ever. She's somebody I've known since 2006, Hildur Gudnadottir, and she has been like making music and doing her thing her whole adult life, and all of a sudden just won all the awards she possibly could in the span of like 8 months, and that's so awesome. I want to play some of the music that she was sort of making when I first met her. And again, she was somebody who was playing all the time with Bjork and Sigur Rós, and was like the cellist who played with all these non-classical artists, but she was also making her own kind of droney cello music. So I think the first piece we're going to listen to is from 2007. And it's very much like her and her looping pedals in her studio making cello experiments from back then. So we'll listen to that first.
Oops. Come.
ominous vibe with lots of really cool colors happening. And I just wanted to play like a really quick cue from her movie Joker, which she won the Oscar for next. So you can definitely hear like how the one type of work became the other type of work. This is the bathroom dance, if you saw that incredibly dark movie.
And if you just take a look at what Spotify recommends you listen to after this Nadia playlist, Spotify has no idea what to do with this. Just
I'm sure.
you look at it all, it's like Frank Sinatra, Cream. It's very confused, Nadia. I think you it's really good.
Great.
Okay, I got this.
We aim to confuse.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
So a little filmic version of the same kind of trends and theories that we've been seeing in these other pieces. The last composer is a really good buddy. Daniel Bjarnason is a composer and a conductor. You might see him conducting around the world. Actually, probably not these days. No one's doing anything. But he he is a phenomenal conductor and a really beautiful composer. And I think he sort of pulls a lot of these trends in a slightly different direction. So I thought it might be nice to end with him, since it's slightly more, in some cases, like exciting and uplifting. So the first piece I'm gonna play of his is from a larger work called Possessions. This is kind of as rhythmic as I've heard Icelanders get. So that's a movement of his piano concerto. And then I thought I would end with this really beautiful movement of his cello concerto, which is the last movement, for 4 minutes long. Maybe we can listen to the whole thing and then do some questions kind of vibe. So this is Sayun Thorsteinsdottir is the cellist performing the third movement of Bow to String, which I think is called Air to Breath. Yeah.
Awesome.
So Icelandic contemporary music. There's some of it.
Let me just say before we see if there's any questions, Nadia, that was awesome. And I just want to put out there how awkward having me and Eric have done some of these Zoom kind of things. And when everybody's muted and it's impossible to feel anybody, it's just an awkward way to speak.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing such an awesome job, because it's not the easiest platform to give thoughts.
Oh, thank you.
With it just this like kind of vacant, other side. But I know I just put together an email where I copied the whole playlist so we can all go deeper, because it's true. I mean, a lot of these are single movements of longer works. It'd be awesome to listen to the whole works. And partly what I was thinking is that my listening these days is kind of weird. I don't quite know what to listen to in this brave new world. And actually this playlist is hitting the spot in a certain way, because it lets you sit in a place for a while. It doesn't kind of push one thought on you almost. It allows the listener to have lots of kind of your own reflective thoughts. So this could be really nice for us over the next month to kind of dig deeper. And so thanks for that.
My pleasure.
You guys have, those of you that are still muted, does anybody have a question for Nadia before we leave? It's gonna be hard to, there's so many probably, but is there anything on your minds?
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Nadia. It's good to virtually meet you, and I hope to see you in person someday. I did kind of want to just ask Jason and Eric a little bit more about the plan for the rest of the semester. So I don't know if we want to do that. Like, I don't want to waste your time with that, but like, I think we're all wondering a bit more about what we're doing. So
it's not perfectly clear what's about. It feels like there can't be any questions. It feels really clear. Yeah, well, I mean, what I just threw in this email to you all is that, here's some more music to listen to. And I think we're going to assign each of you, actually, if you want to take a moment and think about what you've already heard, if there's one of these composers that feels really interesting to you, I kind of threw in this email that if you email me and Eric one or two that feel more interesting to you, we'll try to pass it around so that each of you has one to look at a bit deeper. We're not dealing with crazy research papers over the next semester. I think we're just trying to all have an experience with some music over the next few weeks. So I think that the idea is that you're gonna look at one of these composers, and then we're gonna try to do something comparative between these 5 composers possibly, but also between this kind of scene that Nadia set up for us, and just kind of how different that is from these Icelandic songs that we've been looking at, which could be nice to kind of figure out ways to compare. I have to say, not knowing at all the song cycle that we were looking at this semester, when I walked in, I was just so surprised, actually, because when I feel like I'm gonna go in and listen to Icelandic music, the music Nadia just played for us is kind of where my head's at. That's kind of where the scene is. And then this is just so different, these song settings that we're looking at. So I think there's a conversation to be had there. But I think the honest answer is there's going to be a little bit of writing and maybe a few Zoom sessions where we can talk about these things. I think we're just going to try to learn something about music, because what you guys are supposed to be doing is getting in a room together and playing music, and that's just not going to happen. So, the idea that we can all just go a bit deeper into the scene, that's going to be the only goal. And honestly, this last hour is probably the biggest thing that we're all going to learn. I think, you know what I mean? Like, I think you guys are all going to have a chance to do more listening on your own, but Princeton kind of gave us, gave everybody a little bit of a budget to bring in a guest. So we just kind of tried to think of the coolest guests we could bring in. So I think, I don't know, Eric, if you have anything to add, but I don't think anybody should be worried. It feels like a lot of these classes are going to pass fail, and I don't know how you guys feel about that. I feel like that's an option that we're offering that makes a lot of sense to me. But if you guys are wanting grades, I think everybody's going to be fine. Look into a composer, have a thought on Zoom. It's going to be okay.
Grading, it sounds like some people aren't quite sure what they want, but I think an interesting middle ground could be like optional PDF, if you guys are considering that. That way, those who are worried because of this odd circumstance can pass fail, and those who still want to get graded would be able to, if that's something you guys think would work.
Yeah, we'll check that out. I think Eric probably knows the most out of anybody on this call. Nadia, do you like pass fail or do you like grading systems and just in general?
Oh man, I don't know.
No, I know, Max. That's a serious question. We'll figure it out. That makes a lot of sense to me. If a few of you are looking for grades, and a few of you are looking for pass fail, I think we'll try to figure out the best thing we can. We'll try to figure out the best thing we can. And I'll maybe I'll send this email that I already typed up with this playlist right now. Nadia is still on the chain, so if there's anything that you guys, oh Nadia, this is great. You froze in such a wonderful. You know, I should take a picture of this freezing because the last one was so epic. This is such a happy froze. So I'll send this to you guys. It has the playlist. We can, if you guys send back a thought you have on a composer, we'll get that going, and then we'll get you answers to the pass fail and exactly what we're looking for. But I think the idea is there's going to be two kind of things to do. One, look into one of these composers and have some thoughts that you can share with others. And then two, we'll do something more comparative. Does that, and I also can't say enough. I think you should be at ease. I think everybody understands that chamber music is not something that should be done over a Zoom platform. So we're me and Eric are not going to be grading papers like your English professors are. No, we're not equipped to, and we're not going to try to. I think we're just looking for almost journal or blog entries. We just want you to have thoughts on music over the rest of the semester. So I don't think anybody needs to be worried about it, as long as you, like I said, have a thought on one of these composers that we could talk about at another Zoom meeting. And we could read about it a little bit, and then something towards the end of the semester where we can compare things in a bigger way. Does that help, folks?
Yeah, that sounds great. I feel like since we're having to switch gears so much from what like we thought the course was going to be, that like I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know how like we're going to like do this or be graded on it. But I think, yeah, a relaxed approach is
Totally.
because then
Well, some other ensembles, if you're playing a Beethoven quartet that's really part of a standard repertoire, and you can do kind of comparative analyses between different quartets version, that's just not this piece is such a specific thing to this instrumentation in this group. It's we're not going to be getting into kind of comparative analyses of the specific piece. So we're looking at just something broader. Yeah. So I think, but we can over the course of the semester, and I mean, maybe we can just use this Tuesday at 5 o'clock moment. I don't think it's going to be a weekly check-in, but there'll be maybe a few over the course of the semester where we can check in. So, like I said, maybe let me send this email that kind of Nadia texted a nice goodbye. It's probably fine that she froze because there's no reason she should be listening to us figure out what the hell we're doing in COVID-19 pandemic Princeton. I'll send this email that just kind of wraps up this listening session and Nadia's presentation. And Nadia is just really, really, I mean, I could have gone on a lot more. She's very impressive on the award bent as well, or on all those kind of things. She's just a really impressive person in the scene right now. So you guys are on an email chain with her if you want to ask a question about this music. She's incredibly knowledgeable. But then maybe towards the end of this week, we'll look to have something more specific in terms of like these 2 calendar days. Let's have Zoom things. This is your first research moment to look into this composer. That we'll try to be more together on that, if that's cool. Does that work for everybody? Mm-hmm. Max, we'll try to have an answer to your question in terms of pass fail or grades. But like I said, I think, I mean, I don't think anybody, I'm not sure. I remember the first class I taught at Princeton. I was a fellow here. I can only imagine sitting in your shoes with different things you're going to do in your lives, how grading is like a thing. From this side, it's just kind of like, hey, do the work and you're going to be fine. So I think if everybody wants to if you don't want to go to pass fail, I think as long as you listen to one composer's music, dig in and have some thoughts and show up for the Zoom sessions, I don't think anybody needs to worry about anything. I want to be, you have other classes that I think are going to be much more, you're going to have to worry about that stuff. So don't let this be a stress, but please do something. Okay, cool. I can't hear you, Eric.
You're muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
How many of you do have classes that are going pass fail.
Some of them are going pass fail. Some are going optional pass fail. Yeah.
You guys, if that happened, like, is it better to try to have grades, or is it not really a big difference considering all the craziness this semester?
I think it depends on like the type of class, and I think with this, especially like since it seems like it'll be like sort of like a fun, interesting like dive into like composers and music, I don't really think we need to do a pass fail mandatory. I don't think it's like necessary for the class.
Isn't the default option optional? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, optional is probably like fine.
Eric, you keep cutting out. I'm not sure why. I see you're not muted, but unplug. Can you just unplug and go rogue?
I think I could hear you unplugging.
I thought that too. Can you make me the meeting host again? This is unacceptable. Well, I think the few email Eric may have, and Eric, you can even just text or chat or something if you have a real answer to that. I think that a lot of the emails we've been on, the music department has been talking about whether the class wants to go one way or the other. To me, optional pass fail makes a lot of sense. And like I said, without just being a bad teacher, I think if you're going to go for grades, you guys are all going to be fine. Nobody's trying to make Music 13 online something that's going to trip up you getting into med school or whatever. Like, I think, we're all just trying to learn a little bit about music and then, move on. Sorry, but I think I'm gonna have. Yeah, for sure, totally. Don't worry about it, Hanson. We'll get you guys some more information that we can dig up, and we'll give you an assignment on a composer. But if you could, let's just say this: email back. Don't email back the whole chain. Just email me or Eric if one or two, or let's say two of these composers you're interested in, and hopefully that'll make it easy to pass something around. Cool. Thanks for making the time for this, you guys. Hang in there. I know this is just a crazy moment. But we're going to make it. We'll see you soon.
Yep,
Thanks,
that's
guys.
good. Thank you very much. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.